but we actually don't. Got the recording. Good. I'm an airline pilot with an international airline here in Dubai. And we obviously do freight, but I'm not involved in the costing and that kind of stuff. So I apologize for that, Jana, but the talk in terms of culture is going to be very much how we deal with various cultures, and in a business meeting or a business setup, how you actually just look for different things. Culture is an enormous subject, but you actually speak on the specifics of trade and the specifics of exactly dealing and transporting goods across. You're probably going to be looking more to Robin in terms of import, exports, and that kind of stuff. So I need to put that out right now, where we're at. But it's a cultural discussion, and that's the premise of it. I work with over 100 different nationalities, and that's interesting in itself. And you become very, very good at first impressions, and to learn not to have your own cultural bias when meeting somebody. And then very often people just jump out the box and you just don't understand it. For instance, you find German people actually funny. And that's like, what? Really? Does that exist? And yes, they are. There's amazing people. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey for me. And that's essentially what I'd like to share with you right now. Like I say, culturally speaking, it's a huge, huge subject. But it's how we deal with the various cultures that really count.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that okay, Jana? You still going to stay on?
Yeah, fascinating. Because if we do export, then I'm going to have to deal with different cultures. So definitely, it's going to be.
I'm glad.
Yeah. Thanks.
Right. I realize time is marching on, and I don't want to take up too much time. But over to you, Diane.
Well, actually, Allan, it's over to you. So Allan and I. I have my brother-in-law and Allan know one another, so it's really a small world. So you've got to be really careful what you say about people to people, because it might just come back at you. But Allan and I were part of a speakers group last year, and I thought it would be interesting, as a lot of people are stepping into the import-export space right now, to look from a completely different viewpoint and to use and abuse Allan's expertise as he shares with us, because of the expertise that he has, and you'll, I'm sure, learn more about it as he shares with us. It's very unique. And we assume that everybody understands what we say and how we say it, that it's okay. And when you start dealing with different cultures and different countries, you've actually got to get your words right for your clients, but you've also got to get the way that you do business right. So I think this is going to be a very interesting chat, and please keep your questions. We will ask Allan some questions, hopefully not like Robin was asked this morning, but we will ask Allan some questions along the way, and how it will influence our business as we step into that import-export kind of arena. So we're really thrilled to have you, Allan. We try and keep it down to exactly an hour because everybody's really busy. We do record this, and obviously the speakers will critique you, as I'm sure you'll love to hear from them in a little while when they get the recording. And so over to you. Thank you so much for your time, Allan.
Hey, guys. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be along. So just a little bit of background as to who I am, where I am, and how I've come to be here. As Diane's already said, yes, I do know her brother-in-law very well. We actually did national service together many, many years ago. I ended up being his best, involved in his wedding ceremony as such. But yeah, we've been besties for a long time. And but that be that as it may. I've been in the UAE now for 15 years. I'm an airline pilot, and I used to fly for British Airways Comair. My only claim to fame was that Kulula.com, I was lucky enough to do the very first flight of Kulula down to Cape Town. So yes, we had the TV press on board. It was really quite special and quite entertaining. Before that, I was an air traffic controller for many years. So aviation is my theme. And coming across to the Middle East, I realized that culture is something we don't talk about too much. And there seems to be, I wouldn't say a big divide in it, but just the understanding of other people's cultures is really, really important. So with that in mind, let us begin. So we're going to do this, and I'm going to share my screen with you. Can everybody see that? It should say something like case for culture, and the cross-cultural communication and the impact it will have on your business. Again, my name is Allan Edmunds, and enjoy. There we go. So the case for culture, have you ever had a time when you've spoken to somebody from a different culture and you walked away thinking, wow, they actually, it was very different and they were pretty rude. And it happened to me when I first got here to Dubai. Walk into an elevator, being South African, we tend to be quite cheery and friendly people. And the people, you say hello in an elevator and they just look at you. And they're like, what's going on? This is quite rude, actually. But again, I'm coming from my own cultural bias. So now how do we actually work with this? And what does this actually entail? So what is culture really? And it's essentially, it starts off the way we dressed. Even though somebody may dress and even speak English the same as you, it doesn't necessarily mean that their culture is the same. And we come from our own cultural bias. And that in itself is a challenge. And we tend to judge others, be it consciously or even subconsciously, based on that alone. So it'll come down to the way we are dressed, the way we speak, our personal space associated with one another. And that all forms a bias by which we actually were brought up from the time we were born. We were brought up in a certain way, and that essentially becomes our culture. But if I had to ask each one of you, would you be able to describe the South African culture? I think you'd find it actually more difficult than you think. And if only when you interact with other cultures would you actually begin to realize that, okay, we do things a little bit differently. We say different words for different things. And, our jokes don't make sense to a lot of people. So there is, and if you had to describe it, I'll probably have 9 or 10, however many people on the call right now, different versions of how they would describe the South African culture. But again, this is coming from an aviation perspective, and I am going to show you some things to do with aviation. I'm going to show you an accident in a short while where culture played a major part in the accident. Again, there are many layers to culture. In fact, it is multifaceted, you'll not believe. So we're going to talk today about country culture, but inside it, there's so many different cultures. I mean, you're talking about age, or there's even a gender such, there's a subcultures that form part of our lives. And we will fit into it. There's a professional culture, there's a work culture, there's a corporate culture, and there's an age culture. For those that are young and those are, well, not as young as we'd like to have been, there certainly is a difference in the way we interact and the way we do things in this world. And that comes down to the part of culture. And right in the middle of it, we have us, the human being, the personality inside there as well. So it's a very multifaceted thing. So interacting with people from different cultures, I'm going to generalize. And because it's such an enormous subject, I'm going to generalize between the East and the West and how we do things differently. You find in the East tends to be more, their culture is more one of inclusion, more community-driven, more nurturing, whereas you find the West is a lot more individualistic, task-oriented, power-oriented as such. And the way we do business is very, very different. And our expectations are different, especially when you're sitting around a boardroom. So those are the various layers that we can discuss in a short while. So I want to start with this accident. I just want to start that for now. It's called Asiana 214. It is a Korean airline, and they actually took off from Seoul, Korea, flew across to San Francisco in the US. And on that particular day, there was a senior captain in the left-hand seat. So I'm going to love my props. Whenever you deal with a pilot, you'll always have an airplane handy somewhere and a model to show you some stuff. So here we go. On the left-hand seat is normally where the captain sits. And on the right-hand seat is where the first officer sits in the airplane, and we're heading that way. And there are normally 2 extra seats in the airplane. We call them jump seats. That's in the flight deck. And this particular day, it was a training flight. Yes, we do live training. And what was happening was there's a training captain sitting on the right-hand seat this time. And we had a student, but yes, he was a senior person within the company and also a senior, probably older than the training captain. The training captain had a lot more experience. But the sadness is, and you'll watch what happens, these guys get themselves really, really low coming into landing. And they don't do what we would deem an absolutely normal procedure, is to say, this is not working, let's get out of here. And we call that a go around. And really simply, all it means is just going around. Let's go, come back and try that again. This particular day in San Francisco, beautiful day, clear skies, no issues, except we have a thing called an instrument landing system that guides you down to the runway. And that wasn't working. So they were doing a thing called a visual approach. Now, the captain was under training because he had come from another airplane type. So we are trained type specific for each aircraft that we use. So have a look at this.
Good morning. Can I put one for -7 miles south to LS?
And 214 over San Francisco, starting with my left side line.
The light blue is where the aircraft should be. And that was the end result. The most amazing thing out of this, there was 307 people on board that aircraft and only 3 people lost their lives. 1 person was not strapped in. So when they ask you to please fasten your seatbelts, it is rather important. Some reasons carrying on. So 1 person, can you believe this? They actually staggered out the aircraft and they were tragically run over by one of the rescue vehicles, one of the fire engines coming to the aircraft in haste. Actually ran over this lady and killed her. That's really, really tragic. But the sadness of this is the whole incident was completely avoidable. And it comes down to one simple thing when you're dealing with cultures from the East, and again, I'm generalizing, that they won't speak up to an authority, a person they expect or interpret as older or more authority to them. They will not speak up because there's a thing called saving face. And this is really important to know, is when you are dealing with problems and issues and that kind of stuff, people below or that may deem you as the authority figure will not speak up. They won't say anything. And it could be very frustrating for us as Westerners and thinking, man, just speak up. It's okay. You know, nothing's going to happen to you. I'd like to have the information. But for them, it's not about that. It's that if they do speak up, they would be embarrassing the person in authority and they would lose face amongst the people around them. This particular flight, there was 3 people in the flight deck. There was a junior first officer sitting on what we call the jump seat, as I said, in between the 2 pilots, behind the pilots that are flying. And he actually did say, go around, but they couldn't hear him. And the reason they didn't hear him is a thing called the fight or flight response within the human body. So when you're under high stress, it's to shut parts down that there's things to itself it doesn't need. And one of those is the ears. It happens pretty quickly. So people don't hear because the body is preparing itself to either fight what's coming at it or run away from it. So it starts to move the blood around to the big muscles, being your arms and your legs. So he did say something in the very late stages, like go around, but it was too late. The tragedy is that the training captain, it's his job to ensure the safety of the aircraft. As I said, yes, we do live training. So we do a training on the simulators first, and then we come across onto the live aircraft. And we do what they call a couple of familiarization sectors with a training captain who is very experienced, and they will catch the things that go wrong. But in this particular day, he did nothing. He allowed the accident to happen. So in terms of the country culture, this is a big problem. And in terms of aviation, this is an enormous problem because we have a different culture within aviation, and that is a safety culture as well. And a pilot professionalism, that's a culture, a subculture, and this is unacceptable. We cannot have people in our airplanes flying like this. They have to speak up. So with people coming from the likes of Korea, China, Japan, etc., they are taught to speak up against authority because that's what is expected of them. They're not being rude. They're just purely stating facts so we can actually share the information and fix any problems that are coming up. So again, we might be all in the same game, but we are definitely all playing, or we may be playing by different rules. And what I mean by this is, you know, you have people coming into the boardroom and they have different expectations. And again, coming along the lines of the Asiana 214, you might find your clients is basically leave, they're not responding to you anymore, and you may have offended them somewhat. Again, the West, we tend to be quite direct. We are task orientated and we want to get the job done. So we ask the people that we're going to deal with in the East, can you do the job? And can you do the job by this date? But for the East, it's very different. For them, it's about building a relationship, because once they have a relationship and they can trust you, then the business will go ahead. So it's 2 vastly different ways of looking at things. And with the East, and again, I'm generalizing, but you're talking about your Chinas, Koreas, Vietnams, and that kind of stuff, the contract, once it's signed, isn't necessarily finished. Whereas in the West, once a contract is signed, that's what we're going to go according to, that's what we're going to do, and that's the way it's going to be, and that's our expectation. But in the East, it's a little bit different. So there, it's a case of, well, the contract is signed, but it's still kind of negotiable. And that's the way the game is played on that side as well. But then it comes to the isms and what I'm referring to here, our South Africanisms that come up. Let me give an example. I was flying with an Australian young man, and we out of Perth flying back to the UAE, and we're passing about 25,000 feet on the climb, and all of a sudden he shouts out, "Damn it! Hey, what's going on?" He says, "I forgot my sunnies in my dad's ute." I said, "What?" What he was actually trying to tell me, and again, it's using all those little slang words and that kind of stuff, but it was great, but I didn't understand what the heck he was talking about. So what he was saying is his sunnies, his sunglasses, was in his father's utility vehicle. And as we know in South Africa, it's called a bakkie. So yeah, he'd left his dad's sunnies or his own sunglasses in his father's bakkie. So coming on to the beware the South Africanisms, and we all do them, and we do that without thinking. And one of the most famous ones over here, which people always ask me about, is this one. "I'll see you just now." What does that actually mean? Well, it means it's not as long as now. And these are the things that people find quite funny and entertaining, but also very, very confusing. So when you're dealing with clients, use the English that they are going to understand as well. And another one like robot. Yeah, the robot, you're going to turn left. And people are going, "A robot?" No, it's called a traffic light in other parts of the world. And again, things just to bear in mind. And of course, can I have some chips with the tomato sauce? Over here, it's normally fries and ketchup. Generally is understood by most of the places in the world. And of course, we're going to meet for a braai. So I was flying with this guy once, and I find it very funny. He was an English bloke, quite a young guy, and he says he was flying with a South African captain, and he invited him to a braai in Joburg, and off he went, and thought this is great. And he'd heard about the South African men are quite beefy and quite strong and that kind of stuff. And they handed him a beer, a bottled beer, and then he watched another guy grab one of these bottled beers and just twist open. And he thought, wow, these guys really are strong. Because in the UK at that time, they didn't have twist off tops. They was expecting to do this, with a little bottle opener. And he thought these South African guys are absolutely, he's not going to pick a fight with them. He's going to come off second best. But it's all fun, and that's part of it. Cell phone or cell. Contact me on my cell. People go, "Oh, what?" And of course, it's a mobile in most places. How's it? Again, tends to get a lot of people. It's great. And but if you are going to do business with China, please, whatever you do, don't say, "How's it, my China?" Because that will definitely not go down very, very well. And they will be slightly offended, possibly. But when East meets West, and it comes down to cuisine. Funny story, I was in Sri Lanka, and I love curry, especially the Durban curries. And I asked them at the hotel we were staying at, "Is your curry hot?" "No, sir," they said, "it is mild." I found out that day that they were lying. It was extremely hot, but it's entertaining. So what I'm going to go through now is some drawings and stuff by a lady called Yang Lu. She's from Guangzhou in China. And by the way, there's some enormous cities in China that you probably never heard of, but it's an enormous country. And Guangzhou is one of them, a very modern city, actually. And she was there, and she came across to Europe to study. And she came up with this. Have a look. And it describes things perfectly. So this is how we look. We being the Westerners, we are on the blue side, and the red would represent the East. This is how we look at leadership and the boss. So leadership in most Western countries is exactly like this. We introduce each other by our first names, and I'm Allan, and I'm the captain of the flight, and I expect you to speak up to me if you see anything, come and talk to me, and trying to be inclusive and be team oriented, like a team captain on a rugby field. And so we flatten the power curve or the power arc between boss and subordinate. And that's how the West does it. And it makes information flow that much more frequently. However, on the East, it's a little bit different. They are more community driven, but they look to their leaders as almost patriarchal. And what I mean by that is the employees are very loyal to their employers, the people that have employed them, because they're expecting protection from the employer, and the employees will also give them a lot of loyalty associated with that. And the issue is that you will get substandard service potentially from the East, but they will not get rid of that person because, again, it is an inclusive society. We look after each other here. And however, in the West, is that the person's not performing, you're on your way, man. I think this company is not going to work for you. And we are very performance-driven and task-driven and power-driven. So those are the fundamental differences. And if you start looking at the community and nurture side on the East versus the let's get the job done, that's not about, it's just business on the West, you immediately can start seeing that there's a bit of a clash with this. So moving on, just to illustrate the purpose and the point of the boss being the boss. And the issue with this, with leadership, is that the boss is not questioned. And that is one of the big issues that we had. And it's very much illustrated in this next clip I'm going to show you. And again, just showing you the West, the captain in the example I show you was very, very open. So in terms of leadership in the West, we expect information to come in so we can make better and more informed decisions. On the East, it's not going to happen because they might give information that will embarrass you, and they don't want to do that. So I want to show you this particular example of Japan Airlines. This was in 1985. It's a little bit old now. And you'll see on the bottom right, the image was taken of this particular aircraft. And you'll notice that the tail section was missing. And what had happened was a couple of years before, about 2 years prior to this accident, the aircraft had a really bad landing and they banged the tail in and it damaged what they call the pressure hull in the back of the aircraft. So I don't want to go technical on you, but it's the whole airplane is pressurized and there's like a pressure capsule that we have in there. And what was happening is this particular bulkhead was damaged. That was repaired and everything was fine, but it wasn't repaired properly. And the sadness of these guys, they took off out of Haneda in Tokyo, doing quite a short flight across to Osaka. And this pressure bulkhead exploded and it broke off a large section of the rudder. So they couldn't turn the aircraft. But not only that, it took all the hydraulic fluid, which is what we use to maneuver the airplane, go up and down, left and right. All the fluid went out. So the aircraft was basically unflyable. And the sadness was it took them quite a long time to realize this, but also the captain kept on saying to the first officer who was actually flying the airplane, manipulating, yes, airplanes do have a little control, looks like a steering wheel in your car, and that's how we control the aircraft. Airbus, different style, they got a little stick on the side. But nonetheless, what had actually happened was you could see the airplane was turning to the right, but the first officer trying to turn the aircraft to the left and nothing was happening. And he was just barking orders, turn left, I'm telling you now, turn left, and shouting at this first officer. And he was just saying, yes, captain, I'm turning left, yes, captain. And then the airplane would go into what they call a phugoid and then roll to the left. He's like, turn right, I'm telling you now, turn right. And shouting and screaming. And then eventually, after a couple of minutes, they realized this airplane's not working. This is not going to happen. And they then started figuring out that the captain said this could all be hopeless. And then he opened up information. And this particular airplane had 3 crew members. One is a flight engineer. And he said, Captain, maybe if you use the engine thrust, because each airplane wing, if this wing goes faster than this one, it pitches up. And if this wing goes faster, then that will come up as well. So they used the engine thrust to try and steer the airplane. But sadly, it was too late. 504 people died that day. They crashed into the mountains. Very sad. But in contrast, have a look at this. Excuse me. I seem to have a bit of a... Okay. This is Captain Al Haynes. He sadly died in 2019, August, but he was a famous captain in the US for this particular accident. Here you'll see 3 engines, 1 on each wing. And there's 1 on the tail section here. And this particular engine exploded and also severed all the hydraulic lines. And the aircraft also was unflyable because all the hydraulic fluid was gone. But very, very shortly, they realized this airplane is not working. They're going to have to do what we call vectored thrust. So they have to use the engines to steer the airplane. And 314 people on this aircraft, they all should have died. But 147 of them are alive today, although be it rather old. But this was in 1989, 5 years later. So what I'm trying to say is the style in which the leadership was operating was very, very different. One was complete autocratic, and the subordinates will not speak up, and they won't because it could lose face for the captain. And the other one in the US was a very inclusive style. Hey guys, give me the ideas. Let's pull together and try and get our experience and our resources going. Then this one's individuality. In the West, I was always told from a small child, you need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet, young man. And as soon as my folks could shoot me out of the house, they did. And yep, being independent, that's great. However, on the East, it's very different. It's very community oriented. And what happens to one affects the other. And you find the folk that live in the UAE from places like the Philippines, Thailand, etc., and India, they are here working for their families. They're not here working to make things for themselves. So they are working, they don't necessarily earn a lot of money, but a lot of it gets shipped back home and the family was able to live. It's a difference between community and individualistic. And then moving on then, for the next one, this young lady came up with this drawing, problem solving. Now, the West, we're very good at that. And we call a spade and then some. And if you places like Germany, they're very direct and tend to be quite unemotional about things. This is the problem, fix it, and off we go. But in the East, it's not quite like that. They tend to walk around the problem. They know there's a problem, but we'll avoid it. And the problem with that is comes with conflict. And because they have conflict, they will not confront somebody face to face in a group setting. Confrontation very rarely happens, but when it does happen, it is in a private office, etc. So to confront people in a boardroom is going to alienate the other person. And very often we get annoyed by other cultures because of their insensitivity to our culture. And this is what a lot of times your deals can get messed up from that, is because of our expectation. Now for us, hey man, there's a problem, we need to fix it. It's on the factory floor, let's get down to it. And you'll also notice as well with problem solving and with the culture, especially with the Chinese folk, is that they're very poker faced. And they will not show any emotion, because if they show any emotion, it is a gauge of being weak and being a weak leader, being a weak dealer in this particular scenario. So they won't give anything away. You wouldn't know if you've actually offended them or annoyed them at all in that respect. Opinions. And again, the West, we're pretty happy at giving anybody our opinion, and it's accepted. And, oh, you can have your opinion. I don't necessarily agree with it, but that's fine. However, in the East, opinions are very, very difficult to come by, because again, it's about the offense, etc., and the saving face. And to give an idea and how they look at the leadership. So we meet each other as in pilots and cabin crew 2 hours before we go and fly. And we have a briefing together. The pilots meet together, and then we go through to the cabin crew and we tell them, oh, the flight's going to be X amount of minutes long or hours long, what weather we can expect, what's our arrival weather going to be expected, what altitude we're going to cruise at, kind of general stuff. And then we find out anything from them that is pertinent. And I always come in there, hello, my name is Allan, and this is what we're going to do. This is my colleague, etc. I don't come in there and dress myself. I am Captain Edmunds. I don't do that. However, some of the folk from the East will not call me by my first name. People from the West are quite happy with it, and they say, oh, he's quite open, we can approach him. But the folks from the East tend to struggle with that. Those that haven't been in the airline for very long in particular, is because, again, it's this hierarchy structure. And for them to speak up against authority is really, really difficult. And it's going against everything that they have known since they were small children. And it's quite challenging in an airline. Now, to give an example, we were on our way through to Los Angeles, and I was very, very proud of this young lady. She'd skipped the hierarchy within the crew setup, because there is a rank structure, and it's there for a very important reason. Anyway, we were pushing back, starting the left-hand engine, and this lady saw something sticking out at the top of the engine. So she phoned the cockpit directly, and because it's a long flight, we had 2 extra pilots in there, captain and a first officer. So I asked them to go back and have a quick look, which they did. So they shot off the back and they came back with some pictures. And sure enough, there was something sticking out the top of the engine. This is really weird. I ask the engineer. And what happens is when we are, maybe you've seen it when you're waiting for aircraft to take off and so on in Joburg, Cape Town, wherever you are, you see there's always a guy plugged into the aircraft, and then he eventually goes, waves off, gives a thumbs up, and off they go. He's an engineer, a ground engineer, and we speak to him through the radio when he's sitting at the front of the wheel. So I asked him to go and have a look. Came back and said, sure enough, there's something there. Anyway, we pulled back into the parking bay, shut everything down, and went and had a look. And what it was a long screwdriver, really long screwdriver. And this aircraft had come out of maintenance, and there's holes in the top of the engine to fit essentially the bonnet or the engines, if you like, the cowls. And just to align it properly so that it clips in on the bottom properly, they put in this long screwdriver on the top, and the engineer simply forgot to remove it. But I was so pleased that this young lady saw the potential threat and spoke to us directly because she saw it could be time critical. But again, it was very, very difficult for her, but she did it. And I was really proud of her. Time, punctuality. We all like to have people come to our meetings on time, don't we? And punctuality, all over, we tend to see the South Africans possibly as rude if you're not on time. In Australia, punctuality is really, really important, as it is in places like Switzerland and Germany. And, you know, if they say a meeting's going to end at 9, it's going to end at 9. And of course, but in the East, it's also punctuality is very important to them. But if you are late, they would understand that you actually have a specific reason for that. And they're going to ask you, why were you late? If you just said, oh, you know, I really had to have a second cup of coffee before coming to work, yeah, probably wouldn't go down so well. And but it's interesting though, but people in the senior positions and positions of authority, they're okay if they come late. That's not such a big issue. And that's something that people have struggled to get used to within the Eastern side of things. Moving quickly now, queuing for an elevator. Only Japan have I seen this done amazingly. I was at a busy hotel and people stood in a queue. Everybody waited their turn to go in and go up to their rooms. It was a very busy evening. But if you're trying to get onto a train in India, it's more like the other side. And everybody, if you show a gap, the guy's there. And again, it goes about personal space. Gestures, and of course, customs. I'll show you a picture there of a business card. So if you're going to do a trade show in places like China, Japan, etc., in particular Japan, business cards still rule. Get your business card and you'll see that they grip them with both fingers, both hands, and they will hand this to you like that. And they're expecting, and the writing is facing you. And they're expecting you to read it and to acknowledge their name and their rank or their title and what they actually do. And they will get the same from you. But what do we normally do, especially nowadays? Oh yeah, thanks very much, put it in your pocket and off you go. But in trade shows, it'll be probably something that you really need to take notice of because you're going to get a lot of business cards with that. Customs, you may not know this, but in the Middle East, in Dubai in particular, or UAE in particular, weekends for us is Friday and Saturday. Yep, Sunday is the first working day of the week. And when I first got here, all of 15 years ago, it used to be Thursday and Friday. And that really messed up things quite a lot, certainly from a trade perspective, and they changed it. And a lot of the things within here is related to the religious beliefs and the religion as such. But just bear that in mind. If you're trying to phone somebody in Dubai on a Friday and they're not answering and getting all frustrated, it's because it's weekend. And then, of course, personal space is always an interesting one. When I first got here, I remember going to this little shop and a young man from India was there and he was buying his bread and that kind of stuff. And I was trying to pay. Next thing, this guy was up against me and pushing his money. And I had to grab him by the scruff of his neck and say, no, this is how we do it. And then I pulled him back. And then afterwards, I realized, you know what? I got all huffy because I felt, you know, he was being insensitive to my personal space and he was pushing in and all that. But really, I had to take a step back and realize that, you know what? That's just his culture. And they are used to that and also being very tightly packed. But there's places like in Sweden and man, the personal space is like 2 meters, the COVID regulation space, you know. Hand gestures, that's one that can really get you into trouble. And again, what I'm trying to get at here, if you're going to deal with a specific country, learn the cultures, learn the norms, because it's going to help you later on. So as you can see, the thumbs up, what does that normally mean? in most countries, it means, hey, things are really good. And well done, that's really good. We go to Iran, and Iran, this has a very, very different meaning. In fact, this is the equivalent of the middle finger. But in aviation, we have a different culture. So when we push back at the aeroplane, you've got the engineers parked down there, we say to the engineer, thank you, 2 good starts. We'll see you on the left, hand signals on the left. And you'll say, right, goodbye, Captain, see you next time. And then we'll walk out and we'll give him the thumbs up because that's an international sign. He probably thinks, look at these guys, especially when he first started, how rude they are, But anyway, the hand gestures can get you into trouble. Now this, for instance, in South Africa, as we know, this will probably get you beaten up. But where I live in the UAE, this is a sign for patience. And again, these things can perhaps get misinterpreted. The next one is religion. Just don't go there. It is a very difficult subject, and unless you're very interested and open-minded for it, rather don't approach that. Humor is very difficult, and it's very often very specific to certain places and countries, obviously. Be very, very careful with humor because it can offend people very easily if you don't know what, and they don't understand the joke. So very, very careful with humor. Body language, when I first got you, we used to think, oh, this is so funny. The folks from India in particular, and then they have this thing about the head shake. I don't know if you've ever heard it. And I'm going to attempt to show you, but when you ask them the question, is the part fixed? And they go, no, seriously, is it fixed or is it broken? And they go like this. And we as Westerners, we also do it, except, especially as South Africans, we do it a lot, but we do this. It's a forward and back. How are you doing? Yes, no, I'm very good. How are things going on your side? And we all do it. These are little body language and gestures and things that we have. And again, language. What I want to mention with language, sometimes other cultures can come across incredibly rude and very short and abrupt. But just remember, for them, English might be the 3rd or 4th language, and the vocabulary can be very, very little. So, I mean, I first got here again, and one of the local gentlemen said, sit. Go, come, no, finish. And for him, his English was very limited. And you find people with limited English will either shy away from speaking and engaging with you because they don't want to be embarrassed. Greetings again, you go to Belgium and they're going to kiss you. So it's the cheek kiss, left, right, and that's the way things are over here. They tend to touch each other on the nose. And the greetings, especially if you're dealing with a Muslim lady, they will not shake your hand unless they offer their hand to you. They will not shake your hand, and it's to do with their religion. So what I want you to do today, well, first of all, download Google Translate. So if you're going to do anything to do with advertising, or you're going to do some marketing in another country and your product has got a very interesting name, look it up on Translate what it actually means. Let me give you an example. The Mitsubishi Pajero. Do you have that in South Africa? Yep. Now, if you go to Spain, or you go to Colombia, or you go to Mexico, Pajero has a different name. So I remember meeting with my neighbor, used to be a Colombian bloke, and he said, man, I can't drive a Pajero. I said, well, why not? Well, it's got a different meaning where it comes from, and it means wanker. So again, something to be very cognizant of. So what do I want you to do today is download Google Translate. You'll be using it in the future. And to open up those channels of communication with clients and prospective clients, do a little bit of reading on the history of their country, and also look at the latest headlines that are affecting that country. You'll be absolutely amazed at how that affects your relationship. And they all of a sudden, they'll be open and they want to engage with you. And it shows you've taken a little bit more of an interest in not only them, their company and what they can do for you, but also them as a state and a longer relationship. I was going to include this, learn the greetings, as in, hello, hoe gaan dit? And I was speaking to an Irish lady the other day, and she said, if I hear top of the morning to you one more time, I'm going to throw up, she said. So apparently that's probably not the right thing to do, because people may get a little bit on the annoyed side. So always be sensitive to the folk you're dealing with. Be sensitive, be patient, and above all, be curious. And that's that. So folks, any questions, you can also reach me on al@aviatorl.com. And I do another talk as well, my other keynote, which is probably the main one. This is the first time I'm delivering today, so I'd appreciate your comments. That would really help me a lot to develop it. I do another one called The Curse of Compromise, and deals with corporate values. And when values get mixed up, and I look at Boeing and a couple of other companies, how it actually affects your bottom line. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Over to you, Diane.
Thank you so much, Al. That was amazing. It really is very important to understand the culture that you're going to go and interact with. I know Audi TT also comes across in various cultures as an incorrect name too, which is something like chop your head off or something to that effect. And it was really not meant as that when Audi put it together as a name. So you've got to be careful. Google your company's name and your products and services when you step into the culture of another country. And the greeting side, I think that's very important because we tend to want to do the same. And it's interesting to hear the comments that they actually don't want to hear that. So I think that was...
I find what works well is the please and thank you. But to greet them in their own... I find as well, people come and they try and say, "Hoe gaan dit?" and they get it all wrong.
Yeah.
And then, "Hoe gaan dit? How's it?" They don't get it right. It can be a little bit off-putting when you've heard it 15 times. But I find, the please and thank you always goes down fairly well.
Absolutely. Awesome. Do we have any questions from anybody before we continue? Anybody want to jump out there? And, there we go. Robin.
Robin?
Hi. Hi, Allan. My brother lives in China and married a Chinese woman, and they have a little boy together. And I have learned that it is a very hectically different culture to what we used to. She's very abrupt, not great sense of humor. And an example that I always say, but her communication is very clear. You always know exactly where you stand. Yeah. So I remember one Christmas I bought my nephew, bought him some books, some children's books, and I gave them to her to give to him. And she turned around, she said, "Thomas prefers Lego." She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything, but it's been the most unbelievable culture experience, getting to know and love her, because it's difficult.
It's
culture is difficult.
Yeah, extremely. But again, it's about understanding, and they're not trying to be rude. That's just the way they are. Like the respect thing in Japan, I found one of the most amazing cultures I've seen. The respect for their fellow man is incredible. I mean, you look at that tsunami a couple of years ago, people are starving, but yet they were standing in queues to go into a grocery shop to go and choose their food. It wasn't like storming, breaking down the windows, let's get my food. It's very, very different. It's incredibly respectful. Now, China is different to that. But again, the whole premise of this is to research the people that you're going to go into. It's very, very diverse. And the Chinese, like the poker face thing is quite interesting as well. Yeah. Because they don't want to show any weakness, because it's perceived as weakness if you show emotion. And it's really difficult to deal with, because as South Africans, we are fairly animated. I mean, not as bad as the Italians with hands everywhere, but still, that poker face thing is quite interesting. But I like that, Robin. Anything else?
No. I can tell you 50 stories, but I'll spare you all.
I think it's also interesting for South African companies. We often jump onto Alibaba and want to go and buy something. And when it arrives here, it's something that's not anything like what it was originally ordered. So I think it's also about the trust element. From that kind of culture, you've actually really got to build that trust instead of just going online, buying something and expecting it to be the same. What would you say?
Yeah, I would say the same. That's, again, it's community driven. And I'm generalizing. When I say East, it's the whole part of that. I mean, it includes the Philippines, which tends to be quite a subservient culture, and that can be taken advantage of quite easily. Yeah. The Chinese, as Robin has said, can be quite strong, actually, and Japanese. By the way, Japanese, if you go there, you are going to go to a karaoke bar. Just know that. Even if you can't sing, it doesn't really matter, but it's about the inclusion, and it's about building a relationship. They really don't mind if you can't sing. But those things like that, you're going to have to, again, break down defenses. We tend to be very self-conscious as Westerners. But coming back to your thing, Diane, yes, the Chinese can be quite tough, actually, in the way they deal with things. They're quite merciless, but also direct, which is interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Sorry, Shireen, I saw your hand up and then next minute you had disappeared. So I wasn't sure if it was a wave goodbye or hello or...
I was technically challenged and pressed the wrong button. Apologies. Hi, everybody. So nice to see all the familiar faces. And Allan, thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Shireen Onia. So maybe not, I'm just sharing a story, but not necessarily a South African versus an Asian or anything like that. But I think culture in terms of how we are raised is also something that contributes to behavior. So an example could be a funny one or not, but my future sister-in-law, when she first started coming to our home, you know, my mom, every time after lunch or dinner, my mom would come to me and she'd go like, oh my gosh, this chick really irritates me. She works my nerves because she doesn't clear the table. She doesn't lift a finger. You know, she doesn't help or anything like that. And eventually I said to my mom, I was like, listen, I've had enough of your complaining. You actually need to sit this person down and explain to her that when in our house, this is the way that we do particular things. And I think what my point is about communication is very important in terms of, you know, cultures and things like that, is that, you know, when she had the conversation with this person, realized that this person is the only female in her home because her mother died when she was very young. So she was raised by a father and 4 boys. And in their home, they had a nanny who cleared the table, packed away everything, picked up their clothes, did everything for them. So that was how she was raised. And it wasn't a bad thing about her. It was just that was the norm for her. Yeah. So, you know, the norm for us is not always the norm for everybody else. And if we just communicate it and try and understand it or ask the right questions, then it would work for better relationships.
People don't purposely go out to annoy you. They just tend to do that without, you know, thinking of it. But it's insensitivity, and we get, it's unfair, this person did this. But from their culture, man, if I don't jump in now, I'm going to lose out. So especially in Dubai, pushing in and that kind of stuff is really annoying, but it's part of where they come from. And it's just that insensitivity that tends to annoy us. If you can just take a step back and say, maybe this person isn't, you know, being irritating for, you know, just to get to me, but maybe they're just doing it out of their culture, like you said. I think that's good. Thanks, Reen.
Awesome. Sam?
Hi, Allan. Thank you so much for this presentation. I must just say that, you know, we're focusing a lot on culture and on other people's culture, but within South Africa, I think the problem is just as big, especially when it comes to language. I know from time to time we send text messages and get people completely misconstrue what you're going to say over a text message. I actually have started sending voice notes all the time now. But one of the things, especially that I find with foreign clients and business dealings, is foreigners don't have the intonation that we do. So sometimes it's not just the words we use, but the way we say things as our voices go up and down. And when English is your 3rd or 4th language, you don't necessarily learn intonation. So you just say things as bluntly as, well, it's just the words I know. And I think a lot of that also contributes heavily to business dealings going wrong and for people specifically getting extremely irritated and offended by each other.
Absolutely. I think you've hit the nail completely on the head. Absolutely. And that's us, and we understand ourselves because we're involved in this culture for so how long, you know, but you can imagine dealing with another culture, and that's why staying and doing humor in particular, very tricky. You've got to be very careful with that because it doesn't translate.
Yeah. Absolutely. So there's a number of people on the call here today that are stepping into that international arena. And I know that Janine is hopefully, or casting concrete, I'm not sure, by the end of next year, going to be living in a country in Europe. People stepping into that kind of space, do you think that it's best to reach out before you go into that space to build some sort of community of people that trusts you before you get there, or even before you do workings in the different countries? From your viewpoint, what do you think is the best way of dealing with different countries and spaces?
Sorry, you're asking me or the group?
You.
Being in different countries and spaces. It's actually really, I'm going to have to think about that one day. Sorry.
No, I think it's because it's interesting. You fly all over the world. Do you ever reach out to any of the people in the different countries at any time? And if so, why would you?
Yeah, it's actually a very good question. And the answer is no, we don't, because our layovers are pretty short. And to form any kind of friendships and things is generally with friends that have left South Africa and are now living abroad. And then, yeah, you do connect with them. But South Africans, generally, we fit in very easy. And a lot of us have gone to Australia. Now, we say Australia is very similar in terms of culture. Yes and no. Having worked with them, let me ask you this question. Who would have thought, or who thinks are more pedantic? And I'm being really racist here, and I do mean to be. Who would be more pedantic, the English or the Australians? Who would you say? The stiff upper lip guys? And I was so shocked because I thought, the English will generally be quite pedantic about what they say and what they do, etc., and how they conduct themselves. They are so much more laid back than the Australians. It was a big shock for me and all of us that came here. So Australians are very, very rule bound, and they are very follow the rules. We hear it all the time. Oh, mate, the book says, and that's what we're going to do. And that's fine because they follow the rules as they are. Let me give you an example. So we get there one night into Sydney. It's about 2 a.m. in the morning. It's just the air crew to go through. There's 17 of us. And I go through and I see, we're still waiting for 4 people. I'm like, what's going on? So I walk back to the immigration and I have a look. And this is at 2 o'clock in the morning. There's nobody in the airport. And the customs or the immigration official says to me, oh, mate, it's the shift change. And I'm thinking, you got 4 people to check in, man. 4. We're all tired. We've been up all night. Can't you just do those 4 quickly? It'd take you like 5 minutes. Oh, no, mate. That's where it is. And that is good. And it has its irritations for us as well, because we as South Africans are very much a can-do type of people. Problems, not an issue. You'll figure out a way. Make a plan. And that's the way we approach a lot of our things that we do. But a lot of countries don't do that. So going across there, if you want a light bulb changed, you've got to get an electrician. Don't do it yourself type of thing. And there's got a thing called dobbing in. And I'm kind of getting on the Australians, and I shouldn't, because they actually are great people. They are annoyingly good at sport, which is really irritating. But they're actually very, very good people, but they're very, very direct. And they don't mean to offend you. They just tell it as it is. And then you've got the German folk, again, they direct. And it's not an offense. It's just, why mess around with all sorts of stuff? Just get to it. Oh, one other thing I wanted to mention about the Russian folk, and I only found out this the other day. The South Africans, we tend to be very friendly. And as I mentioned before, when I first got here, I got into an elevator, hello, how are you? And they just look at you and you think, I'm a colleague, I'm older than you, and there's no greeting. And, people just thought you're weird. And I found out from a Russian lady the other day, says, if you're walking in Russia, in Moscow, and you smile at somebody and you wave at them, they think you are nuts. They think you have a mental issue. So something just to bear in mind. People perceive what you're doing very differently. We think it's friendly, they think we're nuts. Coming back to, again, I've got friends generally all over the world, and they've integrated very well. And the reason being is South Africans want to go there and build a life for themselves. They don't want to go there, stay South African, and just huddle away in their own communities. And so in terms of integration, I don't think it'll be an issue at all. In terms of business, we are very pliable and we are hardworking people, and that comes through all over. And I've heard comments from that everywhere. Does that answer anything that you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Thank you. I think we doubt ourselves as South Africans. And I was on a call to Germany the other day, and she was saying in Germany, rules are rules. So everybody has been receiving 80% of their salary throughout lockdown. So they haven't needed to work, which is really nice. Whereas South Africa, we have had very little help during lockdown. So people have had to innovate. They've had to make do with what's going on, or have a side hustle or another hustle or whatever the case is. And their comments were that South Africans are very innovative and therefore want to work more with South Africans rather than actual people within Germany. And I thought that was quite an interesting comment, because we find it very hard as being in South Africa, looking out and thinking that the world's looking at us. So thanks, Allan, so much for being here today. Thanks, everybody, for jumping on the call and for the questions and for the comments. It's always awesome to meet up and go and be fabulous, make lots of money, and let's see you traveling around the world. You have Allan's details. If you need to know anything more about culture or any country in specifics, then drop him a mail and I'm sure he'll be able to help you out.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks, Diana. Thanks, everyone, for your time. I really, really do appreciate it. Comments will be great, so I can work on this and make it more useful for people like yourselves.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Again, we're going to chat about values, corporate values. I've got another talk with the aviation slot.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks, everybody. Go well. See you soon. Bye.